I never imagined that the person who would try to take everything from me would be someone I had welcomed into my own family with open arms. I was 67 years old when it started. Not sick, not confused, not helpless. I had retired 2 years earlier after 31 years of teaching 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary in Columbus, Ohio, and I had settled comfortably into the life I had always promised myself I would live once the classroom was behind me. Tuesday mornings, I volunteered at the public library, helping children with their reading. Thursday afternoons, I drove myself to the botanical garden with my friend Carol, and we walked the paths and argued pleasantly about which roses were the most beautiful. I cooked my own meals, paid my own bills, and slept soundly in the house my late husband Raymond and I had built our life in. The mortgage had been paid off 11 years ago. The savings account was healthy. I was, by any honest measure, doing just fine. My daughter was the light of my life. She always had been. From the moment she was born, I had looked at her and known that whatever else I did or did not accomplish, she was my greatest work. We spoke on the phone every few days. She lived 40 minutes away, in a suburb on the other side of the city, and we had dinner together at least twice a month. I loved her completely and without condition. I did not feel the same way about the man she had married. My son-in-law had come into her life 6 years before all of this happened. He was handsome and charming in the way that certain men are charming, which is to say that the charm had a surface to it, something you could admire but not quite touch. He sold commercial real estate. He talked about money the way other people talked about the weather, constantly and with great authority, always predicting which way it would go. My daughter seemed happy with him, and that had always been enough for me. I smiled at family dinners. I sent birthday cards. I kept my opinions to myself. The first sign that something had shifted came on a Sunday afternoon in late October. My son-in-law drove over alone, without my daughter, which was unusual. He sat at my kitchen table and accepted the coffee I offered him, and then he looked around the kitchen with an expression I could not quite name at the time. It was not a social expression. It was something more like an appraisal. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was doing well. He nodded slowly, as though my answer had confirmed something he already suspected. And then he said he and my daughter had been talking. They were worried about me, he said. Living alone in a big house at my age, what if something happened? What if I fell? What if my mind started to slip? And there was no one there to catch it. I told him my mind was perfectly sharp, thank you. I told him I had a doctor I saw regularly, and she had never expressed a single concern. I told him I had Carol next door and a whole network of friends, and that I was not lonely and not frightened and not in need of being managed. He smiled. That smooth, surface smile. He said, of course, of course. He just wanted me to know they were thinking about me. After he left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching his car disappear down the street. Something in my chest had gone quiet and still, in the way things do before a storm. He started coming around more after that. Sometimes with my daughter, sometimes alone. He asked questions about the house. Casual questions. The way you might ask out of ordinary curiosity. How much had we paid for it back in 1988? Had I had it appraised recently? Did I know that property values in this neighborhood had gone up considerably? He mentioned once, almost in passing, that a house like mine in this zip code was probably worth $380,000. Maybe more. I noticed that he had started calling me Mom. He had never called me that before. My daughter began calling more often, and the calls had a different texture than they used to. There was an agenda underneath them now, a direction she was trying to steer me toward without quite saying so directly. She mentioned a lovely retirement community out near Dublin, beautiful grounds, very social, lots of activities. She mentioned that it might be nice to be somewhere with people my own age, with support available if I ever needed it. She mentioned that she worried about me. I asked her once, gently, if this was her idea or her husband's. There was a pause. She said they had been talking about it together. She said they both cared about me. I said I knew that. I told her I loved her. I changed the subject, but that night, after we hung up, I sat in Raymond's old armchair by the living room window, and I let myself think clearly about what was happening. I thought about it the way I used to think about a student who was struggling, turning the problem over carefully, looking at it from every angle. My son-in-law had a talent for numbers and a deep interest in property values. He had begun inserting himself into conversations about my finances with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed the approach. And now my daughter, my warm and trusting daughter, was beginning to use his language, his concerns, his suggestions. I was not confused. I was not frightened. But I was paying attention now. In November, my son-in-law asked me to come to their house for dinner and said he wanted to talk to me about something important. My daughter made pot roast, which she knew is my favorite. They had wine open on the table. The table was set nicely. It had the feeling of a presentation. After dinner, my son-in-law slid a folder across the table toward me. He explained that he had spoken with a financial advisor, a colleague of his, and they had put together some paperwork that he thought would give everyone peace of mind. It was a durable power of attorney, he said. Standard document. Just a formality. It would allow him to help manage my financial affairs if I was ever in a position where I could not do so myself. He said it would protect me. He said it was what any responsible family did when a parent was getting older. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at her hands. I picked up the folder. I looked through the papers. The power of attorney was comprehensive. It covered my bank accounts, my investment accounts, my property, my retirement funds, everything. And there was a second document underneath it. Something from a senior care facility called Meadow Ridge. A brochure with a cover letter addressed to me, explaining that my family had made preliminary inquiries on my behalf, and they were ready to schedule a tour whenever I was ready. I put the folder down. I said I would think about it. My son-in-law said that was great, that I should take all the time I needed. He refilled my wine glass. He smiled that smile. On the drive home, I pulled over twice because my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something closer to grief, because I had looked at my daughter across that dinner table and she had not met my eyes. And I understood then that she had let herself be convinced of something. She had let him build a picture of me in her mind. A picture of a woman who needed to be managed and protected and guided, and she had started to believe it. She loved me. I did not doubt that. But she had married a man who was very good at making people believe things. I did not sleep much that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I was not going to fight loudly. I was not going to cry or argue or beg. I was a retired school teacher who had spent 3 decades teaching children that the right response to a problem was not panic, but strategy. I was going to be very, very quiet, and I was going to be very, very thorough. The first call I made was to my own attorney. Her name was Patricia, and I had known her for 15 years through the garden club. She was sharp and warm, and she did not waste words. I told her everything, from the October visit to the dinner the night before. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Ruth, I am very glad you called me before you signed anything." We met in her office 3 days later. I brought every financial document I owned. We spent 2 hours going through everything, and by the end of that meeting, I had a plan. I updated my will. I established a revocable living trust that placed my home and my primary savings under legal protection with specific conditions about how they could be transferred. I signed a new power of attorney, a limited one, naming Patricia and my friend Carol as my agents, not my son-in-law. And Patricia arranged for me to see my own physician for a formal cognitive assessment, documented and dated, demonstrating that I was legally and medically competent in every respect. Patricia told me one more thing. She said that if my son-in-law moved forward and attempted to pursue guardianship through the courts, we would be ready. And she suggested that I let him believe, for the time being, that I was considering his proposal. I drove home, and I sat in Raymond's chair again. Outside the window, the November trees were bare. I thought about my daughter. I thought about how young she had been when her father died, how she had leaned into me for years afterward, how I had been the steady thing in her world. I thought about the man who had looked at my kitchen with that appraiser's eye, who had called me Mom while he slid a folder of documents across my dinner table. I thought about what Raymond would have said. He would have said, "Ruth, you know exactly what to do. You always have." He was right. I did. I called my daughter back and told her I had been thinking about everything and that I appreciated how much they both cared. I said I was willing to take small steps. I said perhaps I was being too stubborn about accepting help. I heard the relief in her voice and it broke something small in my chest, but I kept my voice steady and warm. I said, "Let's take it one step at a time." My son-in-law was delighted. He came by the following week with a revised version of the power of attorney, slightly simplified, he said, easier to understand. He walked me through it at my kitchen table with the patience of someone who believed he was managing a situation perfectly. I asked a few questions. The kind of questions that sounded like the questions of a woman who was a little uncertain, a little grateful for guidance. He answered them smoothly. He was in a very good mood. I told him I wanted a few more days to look it over. He said, of course, "Take all the time you need, Mom." What he did not know was that Patricia had already advised me that even if I signed his version, it would be legally challenged the moment it was filed, because the trust documents I had already signed took precedence. He was working towards something that had already been made impossible. He was celebrating a victory in a game he did not know he had already lost. In December, he told my daughter it might be time to move things along. He told her. And my daughter told me in a phone call that I know she thought was private that a colleague of his had recommended a doctor who specialized in geriatric evaluations, and that it might be good to get me assessed professionally, just to have documentation for the family's peace of mind. I already had my documentation. Patricia had it in a file with my name on it, signed by my primary physician and by an independent neurologist, dated 6 weeks earlier. I was cognitively intact. I was legally competent. I was, in the dry language of the medical report, a healthy 67-year-old woman with no indicators of cognitive decline. The doctor my son-in-law had found reached a different conclusion. I never met this doctor. He submitted a written evaluation to my son-in-law's attorney in early January, claiming to have conducted an assessment and finding that I exhibited signs of early-stage cognitive impairment that warranted consideration of a conservatorship. Patricia told me this was not uncommon in elder financial abuse cases. She told me it was also a serious federal offense. In late January, my son-in-law filed a petition for guardianship with the Franklin County Probate Court. He told my daughter it was to protect me. He said it was the most loving thing they could do. He said once it was settled, they could sell my house and use the proceeds to pay for the very best care at Meadow Ridge, and there would be money left over that the family could put to good use. My daughter called me that evening. Her voice was uncertain in a way I had not heard from her in years. She said she wanted me to know what was happening. She said she thought it was the right thing, but she wanted me to hear it from her directly. She said she loved me. I told her I loved her too. I told her everything was going to be all right. Patricia filed our response to the petition 48 hours later. We submitted my physician's assessment. We submitted the neurologist's evaluation. We submitted the trust documents demonstrating that my assets had already been legally protected under a structure that predated the petition by 10 weeks. We submitted a detailed account of every visit my son-in-law had made to my home since October, every conversation I had documented, every document he had presented. Patricia's paralegal had also identified that the doctor who submitted the evaluation on his behalf was not licensed to practice in the state of Ohio. His certificate had lapsed 14 months earlier. We also submitted a request that the court refer the matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation of elder financial exploitation. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in February. Carol drove me. I wore the blue wool coat Raymond had always said, made my eyes look bright. I sat in that courtroom, and I did not shake and I did not cry. When the judge called the case, I sat up straight the way I had taught my students to sit when they wanted to show they were paying attention. My son-in-law arrived with his attorney. He was dressed well, as he always was. He looked at me across the courtroom with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who expected to win. Patricia stood up and laid out everything we had. His attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. The petition was dismissed within the hour. The judge used the words fraudulent representation and noted for the record that the matter had been referred for criminal investigation. My son-in-law sat very still while this was read. I watched the color leave his face the way light leaves a room when someone pulls the curtain. Outside the courthouse, in the cold February air, Patricia put her arm around my shoulders and said, "Ruth, I have been doing this work for 22 years, and what you did, the documentation, the calmness, the strategy, I want you to know it made all the difference." Carol was waiting by the car. She pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time. The harder part came 3 days later. When my daughter came to my house, she knew everything by then. She had read the court documents. She had seen what her husband had done, what he had been doing since October, the doctor with the lapsed license, the plan for the house, the paperwork he had been building quietly while she believed he was simply concerned about her mother. She sat at my kitchen table in the same chair where he had once sat with his folders and his smooth smile. And she wept in a way that was entirely different from his self-assurance. She wept from shame and from love, and from the particular grief of someone who has discovered that a person they trusted was using their love as a tool. I made her tea. I sat across from her. I held her hands. I told her that she had been deceived by someone who was very skilled at deceiving people. I told her that her love for me had never been in question, not for a single moment. I told her that the worst thing that had happened here was not what he had tried to do to me, but what he had allowed to happen to her, and that I was sorrier about that than anything else. She looked up at me. She said, "Mom, how were you so calm through all of this?" I told her the truth. I told her I had been terrified. I had sat in Raymond's old chair more nights than I could count, turning the problem over, wondering if I was wrong, wondering if there was another explanation, hoping I would wake up one morning and realize I had imagined the whole thing. But I had learned something in 31 years of teaching children, and it was that when something in front of you is real, you have to deal with it as it is, not as you wish it were. She nodded. She wiped her eyes. She looked around the kitchen of the house she had grown up in, the yellow curtains I had hung 20 years ago, the photographs on the refrigerator, the small painted rooster Raymond had bought at a flea market in 1994 because it made me laugh. And she said, "I'm so glad you're still here." I said, "Sweetheart, I never left." She filed for divorce in March. It was not an easy process. He contested it, which surprised no one who had met him. The criminal investigation moved forward as well, and by summer, his attorney was in negotiation with the prosecutor's office. He did not go to trial. He accepted a plea agreement, a felony charge for elder financial exploitation, 2 years of probation, mandatory repayment of all legal costs I had incurred, and a permanent notation on his record. The doctor who had submitted the false evaluation lost what remained of his medical career. I kept my house. I kept my savings. I kept my savings. I kept my Tuesdays at the library and my Thursdays in the botanical garden with Carol. I kept the yellow curtains and the painted rooster and Raymond's armchair and the life I had built, carefully and over many decades, out of work and love and the simple daily practice of paying attention. What I gained was something I had not expected to gain. My daughter and I are closer now than we have been since she was a girl. Something false was removed from between us. Some invisible partition that I had not even known was there until it was gone. We have dinner every week now, just the two of us. And we talk the way people talk when there is nothing to perform and nothing to protect. We laugh more than we used to. She has started coming to the botanical garden some Thursdays, and she and Carol argue about the roses the same way Carol and I do, which I find immensely satisfying. I am 68 now. I walk 2 miles every morning before the neighbors are awake, through streets that are quiet and cold in winter, and green and loud with birds in summer. I know every crack in this sidewalk, every yard where a dog will run to the fence to greet me, every house where the porch light stays on all night. This is my neighborhood. This is my life. People sometimes ask me, when I tell this story, whether I feel sorry for my son-in-law, whether I feel angry, whether the whole experience left me frightened of trusting people. I tell them no to all three. What I feel, mostly, is grateful. Grateful that I paid attention early enough. Grateful for Patricia and for Carol and for the document trail that Raymond always said I was obsessive about keeping. Grateful that I did not panic, did not sign, did not hand my life over to someone who had decided it was available for the taking. Most of all, I am grateful that I knew myself well enough not to be confused by the story someone else was trying to tell about me. He had decided I was fading. He had decided I was manageable. He had decided that my age made me into something smaller than I was. He was wrong about all of it. I am Ruth Chambers. I taught 4th grade for 31 years. I raised a daughter who is, despite everything, one of the kindest people I know. I paid off a mortgage. I planted a garden. I outlasted one husband's illness and one son-in-law's greed. And I am still in my kitchen on Sunday mornings with the radio on and the light coming in through the yellow curtains, and that is exactly where I intend to stay. If you are watching this and you are older and you live alone and someone in your life is beginning to ask questions that feel like the wrong kind of questions, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not need to raise your voice. You do not need to beg anyone to believe you. You need a good attorney, a physician you trust, and the discipline to document everything. And you need to remember that being quiet is not the same as being absent. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply let someone believe they have already won, and then let the truth do what truth always does.